My name is Kim Miller. I'm an editor with Tyndale House Publishers in the United States. And I want to start by just asking, if you were to talk to a group of people and ask them what the role of an editor was, more than likely they might mention correcting grammatical mistakes, spotting spelling errors, and cleaning up a manuscript. And those are very important parts of copy editing. What I'd like to talk to you about today, however, is a different form of editing called developmental editing. And this is a partnership between an editor and an author who work together to strengthen a book, both its overall structure and its content. And it's done in such a way that the author's voice and vision for the book is maintained. Notice when I was giving that definition that the author is key. He or she is a key partner in the role. And so as an editor, the attitude that we bring to each project is important. We come with an attitude of humility, recognizing that the author is the person who is producing the book. We're there to assist and help, and so we want to approach the project with humility. But we can also come with confidence because we're bringing a set of skills and life experience, and we're also bringing objectivity because we've not yet read the manuscript. So we do have some very valuable gifts to give to the author with whom we're working. It's important then to look at the developmental editing process as collaborative, that the editor and author are working together always. The editor is always there to assist, but always ensuring that the author has the final word and say in how things are developing. The other important person, an unseen person in developmental editing, is the reader. And in fact, the editor, the first time they read that manuscript, they're sitting in for the reader. And so when you talk about the steps in developmental editing, certainly reading the manuscript is the first step that we take. And as the editor, we are coming to the manuscript with similar questions each time. Questions like, who is the intended audience? What is the overarching message of this book? And we're looking for strengths and weaknesses as we read a manuscript. So again, if we were a reader, and we are a reader, what do we see in the book that is very strong, and where are areas that we see some areas for improvement that the author might not even be able to see at this point? One way to get all of that feedback in a form then that you can work with the author and get their feedback on is an editorial plan, where you actually list the strengths and weaknesses. And I would say it's very important to list the strengths, to acknowledge to the author that they've done a lot of things right, and then to bring to them some ideas on how to improve the manuscript. So the editorial plan would also include recommendations and specific direction. And that serves as a sort of a blueprint that you can use with an author. Once you have their okay and their input, perhaps they see things a little differently than you do in some areas, you can make some adjustments, but then that becomes the blueprint for you as you do your developmental edit. And I'd briefly like to go over some of the steps in developmental editing. And one thing to keep in mind is that you're focusing on the big picture as you start. And again, that goes back to the audience and message as areas that you're looking at as you read the manuscript for the first time. So one factor we look for is how complete is a manuscript. Does it address an area that's important to readers? That's very key. You've got to draw on readers, and so you've got to make it very clear from the outset that there's something in here worthwhile for them. And so we call that reader's felt need. We also look for a book that carries through to the end and gives the reader either a resolution if it's a story or a payoff if you're covering a topic. We also want to make sure, as Christian publishers, that there's spiritual value in the book and that it's biblically sound. Then another area we look at is structure. And this has to do with how the book is put together, and again, whether it flows logically and in a good order from beginning to end. So that would be looking at things like chapter order. Does it make sense? Headings, are there things like headings that break up chapters? Are there reader resources like maps, glossaries, that some of the information either can be reformatted in those forms, which may be easier for readers to use and access and understand. And so organization is just, again, the overall structure of the book. We look at that. We also look to see if the writing is clear, compelling, logical. So again, as an editor, you're able to give feedback on all those areas to the author. And then I would just say it's important to give specific direction to the author in all of those areas, which means not just saying sometimes your writing is very general or it's awkward. You give examples of places where work can be done. You ask the author to do as much of the work as they can themselves, but you're always there to give them feedback, examples, and ideas. And to just talk through, because most authors do hit a point where they are unsure how to proceed. And so an editor provides a very valuable service there. So once the editing is complete, it's always critical to get the author's approval on a final manuscript. Again, it goes back to the idea that it's their book, it belongs to them, and we want them to be satisfied. At that point, hopefully you can turn your work over to the copy editor, who is now the one primarily responsible with correcting grammar and spelling errors and factual errors and that kind of thing. So as the process continues, as a developmental editor, you still are involved. You're still providing feedback to the author. You might be the conduit between the copy editor and the author. But again, your role is really to stick with the project and with the author until it's all the way complete. And so finally, I would say at the end of the process, one of the wonderful things about being an editor is being able to celebrate with the author, to congratulate him or her, and just rejoice as the book goes out and you begin to hear feedback from readers.